Hello, and welcome to this presentation titled Integrating Literacy into Vocabulary Intervention. My name is Kim Murphy, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communication Disorders and Special Education at Old Dominion University. This presentation is sponsored by the Virginia Department of Education, and therefore I have to disclose that I've received an honorarium for this presentation, and I also receive a salary from Old Dominion University. I have a couple of disclosures that are non-financial in nature. First, I've taken several courses from Dr. Pete Bowers and therefore know him personally. While I do talk about his work in this presentation, I have no financial interest in his company, WordWorks Kingston. Similarly, I use examples and images from the Sound Literacy app. I do know the owner-developer, Kathy Penn, personally, but again, I have no financial interest in her app. This presentation is divided into 3 sections, and each section will be in a separate video. First, I will talk about how vocabulary is important for literacy and go over some of the research. Second, I will talk about how spoken and written language can be integrated together in vocabulary intervention. And finally, I'll show you some examples of what this could look like. Moving into the first section of this presentation, let's talk about vocabulary in the context of literacy. School SLPs have many children with language disorder on their caseloads who have vocabulary deficits. They have smaller vocabularies and they learn words at a slower pace. Research clearly shows that children with language disorder are also at an elevated risk for literacy difficulties. Also significant to consider is that as children become readers, they learn much of their new vocabulary incidentally from books that they read. And so this has implications. Children who have word learning difficulties and those who have difficulty reading are not going to learn as many words as their peers, and so the gap will widen. Vocabulary is important for reading because the more words you know, the more words you can read and understand. It's harder to read words that are not in your lexicon and harder to understand a passage with several unknown words. Learning new words in spoken language involves acquiring the semantic, phonological, and morphosyntactic representations of the words. In other words, you know what the word means, how it sounds, and its grammatical functions. For written language, we must also acquire the orthographic representation, what the written word looks like, or in other words, its spelling and its letters. All of these representations, the semantic, phonological, morphosyntactic, and orthographic, are the constituents of what we call word knowledge. Word knowledge is required for each of the word-level literacy skills, which are vocabulary, reading, and spelling. When the semantic, phonological, and orthographic representations are linked in our mental lexicon, we can read the word, understand it, and also spell it. For reading, accurate word identification happens when the pronunciation and meaning of a word are retrieved from the printed word, and then this allows the meaning of the word to be integrated into the sentence and the text that we're reading. These concepts of word knowledge are drawn from the lexical quality hypothesis. The lexical quality hypothesis states that the quality of mental representations and the extent to which they are connected or bound together is critical to efficient word reading. Efficient word reading, in turn, facilitates reading comprehension. One hypothesis is that morphology is the binding agent that connects the various features of words. Here's a visual representation of how I think about word knowledge. Word knowledge includes multiple components: the meaning and the form, with form being the spelling and pronunciation. And morphology is the thing in the center that governs, if you will, and connects the meaning, spelling, and pronunciation. I'll talk more about the importance of morphology for orthography in a later section of this presentation. For now, let's talk a little bit about what morphology is. Morphology refers to the study of morphemes and the structure of words, or how a word is built, and we think about the base and affixes of a word. Morphemes are the minimal distinctive units of structure in words, and they usually denote meaning. Words are made up of one or more morphemes, and the word's meaning is therefore determined by the morphemes. As an example, let's look at how the word morphology is built. It's built from Greek word-forming elements, M-O-R-P-H, which means form or shape, and L-O-G-Y, which means the study of. So morphology is the study of forms or shapes of words. You can just take a moment to think about what are the morphemes in these words. Do you recognize any prefixes or suffixes? The words books, unhelpful, recurring, and question. And I'm sure you recognize many affixes there. Here, I've categorized morphemes into two types, bases and affixes. There are three types of bases. Free bases are words that can stand on their own. So the word base, for example, or free, or the word the are free bases. Bound bases are those that have to be attached or fixed to another morpheme. They can't stand alone as words. So, for example, the word product has the base D-U-C-T, which cannot stand alone as a word. Twin bases are those that have the same historical root and the same denotation or meaning, but two forms that are spelled differently. So the example that I just gave you of product with the base D-U-C-T, it actually has a twin base D-U-C-E, which we see in words like produce. Affixes also have three types: prefixes, connecting vowel letters, and suffixes. Prefixes are fixed to the beginning of words. Suffixes are fixed to the end of words. Some suffixes begin with vowels, some begin with consonants. And then we have connecting vowel letters like the O in morphology, which joins the M-O-R-P-H and the L-O-G-Y. Research shows that knowledge about morphology and awareness of the morphological structure of words is related to vocabulary, word reading and spelling, and reading comprehension. It plays a critical role in reading comprehension, and to quote from James et al. 2020, should be taught from the earliest stages of reading instruction. This table summarizes the findings of several meta-analyses and reviews of morphological instruction that have been conducted. We can conclude from this research that morphological instruction leads to improvements in not just morphological awareness, but also vocabulary, reading comprehension, spelling, and even phonological awareness. I'll highlight a couple of these findings on the next two slides. In both of the meta-analyses conducted by Goodwin and colleagues, the largest effect sizes for morphological instruction were for the phonologically based outcomes, with these being phonological awareness and decoding or phonological recoding. The effects on phonological outcomes were even greater than for the morphological outcomes. An important finding from the meta-analyses by Goodwin and Ahn and Bowers et al. Was that morphological instruction was particularly effective for the youngest children and those who were less able, such as those with literacy difficulties or learning disabilities. So as Goodwin and Ahn concluded, it makes sense to jumpstart this knowledge from an early age. From this research then, we have evidence that morphological instruction improves other literacy-related skills, including phonological awareness skills such as decoding, and that we should start working on morphological skills even in the early grades rather than waiting for later. The last topic in this section of my presentation addresses orthographic facilitation and orthographic mapping, two areas of research that have been heavily influenced by the work of Linnea Airey and her colleagues. I'll put in a mention here that Dr. Airy has just published a review of her work in the journal Reading Research Quarterly's special issue on the science of reading. So I encourage you to check that out. Orthographic facilitation is a well-documented effect whereby children learn vocabulary better when the spoken word is paired with the written form during learning. So basically, the presence of the word spelling during word learning improves learning of both the meaning and the pronunciation. And this effect has also been shown in children with dyslexia. Closely related to the orthographic facilitation effect, and also to the concept of lexical quality presented earlier, is orthographic mapping. To quote from Airy, orthographic mapping involves the formation of letter-sound connections to bond the spellings, pronunciations, and meanings of specific words in memory. It explains how children learn to read words by sight, to spell words from memory, and to acquire vocabulary words from print. I'd like to clarify the use of the term sight word. It's often used in an instructional context to refer to words on lists of high frequency or irregular words. But in the literature on reading development, it means any word that can be read by sight. And words become sight words through the process of orthographic mapping. To conclude this section of my presentation then, the takeaway is that learning the oral and written forms of words together is more efficient than learning them separately. And this has implications for intervention. We should focus on word knowledge in a broad sense, not just teach word meanings, but also the reading and spelling of words to facilitate orthographic mapping and lexical quality. Please continue to part 2 of this presentation, where I will talk about vocabulary intervention and specifically integrating spoken and written language.